Welcome to the Page of Our Lives podcast with your hosts, Paige Evanson and me, Leslie Stewart. Every week, we take a page from our own lives or the life of an inspiring friend and give you the Cliff's Notes. Friends, we're getting a little spicy on today's show. We visit with Kim Moore, author of Unlock, The Secret to Lasting Intimacy. In her book, Kim decodes the Song of Solomon, explaining how this book, which is full of erotic Hebrew metaphors, was originally written to be told woman to woman as a way to help young brides understand marital intimacy. Through her research into this ancient text, Kim uncovered long-lost ancient wedding customs, which helped make this veiled book of the Bible come alive. Now she's sharing her insights in her book and with all of us on today's show. We definitely jump in the deep end on today's show, so heads up. If you have young ears listening with you, well, you might have some explaining to do. So let's turn the page and talk about sex and the Bible with author Kim Moore.
Hey friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Page of Our Lives podcast I'm one of your hosts, Paige Evanson, and my other co-host, Leslie Stewart.
Hey everybody, welcome back.
We're so glad you're here. And today we have a very special guest. Her name is Kim Moore. She's an author, she's a speaker, she's a wife, she's a mom, she's all the things. But most importantly, Kim has written a book. And for those of you who are actually watching this podcast, for those of you listening, you can just keep listening. Kim has authored a book. She's authored a few books, but the one in particular that we're going to talk about today is her latest book. And I've got it here that I'm going to show you. It'll look backwards on the screen, so I won't hold it up and confuse you too much, but it's called Unlock, The Secret to Lasting Intimacy, The Song of Solomon Decoded, Joy, Betrayal, Forgiveness, and Reconciliation. This book is an in-depth study and retelling based on the Amen, the ancient Middle Eastern nuptial theory. Okay, now that sounds like a mouthful. I promise you, we're gonna try to condense some of what Kim has written in this book today, but you're not gonna want to tune out on this one. So, a little backstory: my mom is good friends with Kim. And my mom got her hands on the book first. And so then she's like, okay, you have to read this. And then my mom has bought several copies and she gave it out to all of her Bible study girls. Even before she had even read the book, my mom's like giving it to me and giving it to all her friends. She's like, you guys have to read this book. You have to read this book. And for me, I'm like an avid reader. So I'm like, okay, I'll read the book. And so I read the book and I'm like, oh my goodness, everybody and their mother and their daughter needs to have their hands on this book. So Leslie has not read the book yet.
I haven't.
And I'm kind of excited because Kim's going to give us all the lowdown. And then before I know it, Leslie's going to be going on and ordering the book as well. So, so we're super excited. But listen, all of three of us in this episode, we are all married. I've been married for 21 years. Leslie, how long have you been married?
Almost 24 in a few weeks.
Almost 24. And Kim, how long have you been married now?
43.
43. So see, Kim has a lot of wisdom that she's gonna give to us. And in the next few episodes, we're gonna be talking a lot about marriage kind of in the middle. Leslie and I are in the middle seasons of married life. We're not newlyweds anymore, but we're not seasoned veterans either. And so, but I really believe that your book has a lot of keys that really will unlock that, especially talking about intimacy and sex and even just there's so much stuff in it. So Kim, I'm going to shut up now because we want to hear from you. This is not about us. This is about you and your book. So I want to know, where did the idea for your book, Unlock, The Secret to Lasting Intimacy, where did this book originate from? Like, how did it all get started?
Well, the funny thing about it is I never, ever wanted to write a book. So no, in fact, my first book is called Now That's Romantic. And it's a long story, but basically, when I was a 19-year-old bride, married only 6 months, this is back in 1978.
That's when I was born.
So, okay, now I know how old you are.
Yes.
So my poor Prince Charming husband came to me and asked me, Kim, what is wrong with you? Are you gay?
Oh my goodness.
And of course, I just started bawling my eyes out. But the problem was I wasn't crying for him. I was crying. I mean, crying for me. I was crying for him because he had waited 2.5 years and he was like, this is what I waited for. This is not what I thought it was going to be like. And I just had so many like religious hangups. So I found this little, I went through several different things where I tried to find some help. One is I actually went to a woman at my church, an older woman, and that was another story. She was like, get away from me. And so yeah. And so I was going to go get a counselor. And then I realized as I was looking through the yellow pages that all the counselors were men. And I was like, not doing that either. So I found this little book on the Song of Solomon. It was just a little tiny paperback, and it helped me a little bit. It took some of the shame and guilt away because I had this, was told before marriage, don't. And then I was told after marriage at church, don't deprive. I couldn't make that jump.
We're talking about sex, people. Like, don't have sex before you get married, and then don't deprive your spouse of sex once you are married.
That's a difficult message to digest.
I couldn't make that switch. And so I was in this really bizarre place where I felt guilty if we had sex, and I felt guilty if we didn't have sex. So I was just like in torment. And so this little book helped a little bit, but it didn't answer a lot of questions because I still was like, can you do this? Can you do that? What's right? What's wrong? And so that book didn't answer those questions, but I got, past a certain point. Years later, we still had issues, which, of course, long story short, but I started studying the song on my own, and I saw that in the 7th chapter, I thought that this woman was dancing nude for her husband. She was doing all these things, having this special romantic dinner getaway for him and things like that. So I thought, well, we're still having issues. So I'm going to try to imitate the woman in the song. So I started doing these romantic dinners for special occasions. My husband liked them so much, and they were helping me at the same time, which was really weird. And so I ended up, he kept saying, write a book about these things you're doing, write a book. And I was like, no. 2 years he tried to talk me into writing a book. And finally I said, I don't know how to write a book. I don't want to write a book. And I heard a little voice go, well, Moses didn't know how to speak either. So what's your excuse? So I said, okay, I'll do it. That book took 5 years. It bombed, a whole nother story, which sent me into why did you give us a song? I was so angry.
You're talking about the Song of Solomon in scriptures.
Right. Why did, I got really angry with God. Why did you give us the Song of Solomon if nobody can understand it? What good is it? And at that point I heard it's a wedding. So I was like, everybody knows it's a wedding. So big deal. So what? But I started doing my research, and it took a while, but I eventually started trying to find ancient weddings that happened 3,000 years ago. Weddings, Hebrew weddings, and then Middle Eastern weddings is when I finally hit the jackpot. And once I found that, I was so excited because I could see the way they actually fit like right into the Song of Solomon in perfect order. And I was just like elated. I mean, literally jumping up and down going, I can't believe what I've discovered. And this was only 6 years ago. And I wanted to just teach it. I was so excited. I just wanted to get out there and teach it. And God was like, no, I want you to write another book. I was like, no, I didn't want to write one. Please don't make me write another one. And this one took like 6 years to write.
Wow.
Well, I'm so glad you have written it. Now, I have actually, read the book, so I know exactly what you're talking about with these Middle Eastern wedding customs. But can you share what were some of those customs and things that you discovered in your research? What did you discover that you were like, oh my goodness, everybody needs to know about this? Because I know as a modern, as somebody I've been married 21 years, I'm thinking, I don't know anything about Middle Eastern wedding customs, and why does that matter to me? So give us the skinny.
I'll give you like a really abbreviated kind of explanation is, I found that betrothal banquets were the very first part of the wedding custom. And if you look at the very first part of Song of Solomon, she mentions a banquet. He has taken me to his banquet. I also found that vows were spoken at at the betrothal banquet. Well, if you look, you'll see the vows. She says a line, he says a line, she says, he says. So you'll see vows in there. Okay. So it was like, well, wow, there's certain things that were fitting, that was the first thing that happened. That's where the bride price was paid and things like that were done. And then after that is what's called the period of separation. And the period of separation is where the groom goes back to live with his father, and he goes to build the wedding chamber, and the father starts to prepare the banquet, and the bride stays with her mother and her family, and she starts to get trained to be a wife. And they can't see each other for at least a solid year while they're in this betrothal, this period of separation. And if you think about that, that goes in perfect parallel with the scriptures in the New Testament, because Jesus is left to go to a place where we cannot go to build the wedding chamber while God prepares the wedding banquet. And nobody knows when he's going to come back and take her as his wife. Right. And so we're in that period right now. We're in that period of separation where we're waiting for the carry. And the carry is when the groom is told by the father, today's the day, the banquet's ready, go get your bride. And he goes and steals her away in the middle of the night with, trumpets, the shofar blaring, and his groomsmen, and they carry her away on a dolly. And they have this, they take her back to the father of the groom's estate, and where the wedding banquet is going to be held. So those are some of the customs that we don't really understand, that are in perfect order in the Song of Solomon, if you understand what happens in those customs.
Right. It's so fascinating, and to think that, because we have typically, somebody gets engaged, and then they may have a short engagement or a long engagement, but the couple still sees one another. So what you're saying is, in Middle Eastern customs, and when the Song of Solomon was written, the bride and the groom, once they were betrothed to one another, they didn't see each other for a long period of time. And so that groom would go and be getting ready to receive that bride. And so what are some of the things that groom would do? And then what was the mother of the bride teaching her daughter?
Well, the groom would go back to build the wedding chamber. And
which is their bed that they would consummate the marriage on? What's the wedding chamber?
Well, the wedding chamber is actually just the building. That's all it is. It's on the father's estate. The father had to approve it because it's on his property, and it had to meet his standards. And so it had to be something that was bigger and nicer than what she was accustomed to. So we hear about mansions and glory. Yeah, that's kind of, he goes back to build a mansion. Jesus is doing that for his bride. Okay. So, but on the other hand, the bride is staying with her parents, and that's when they give her marriage bed, which was the major part of her dowry. And the marriage bed was this amazing, beautiful piece of furniture. And the mother of the bride taught her how to use her marriage bed and what happened in that marriage bed, and all about her body. And it was like a period of I call it a maturity makeover. It was taking this little girl, because back then brides got betrothed around 14, 15, 16. So they took a immature girl and transformed her into a mature woman ready for marriage during that time, which is also what we're supposed to be doing as the bride of Christ. We're supposed to be getting ready and mature for his return.
Wow. It's so beautiful.
It is. And it ties in with the New Testament. I think the Song of Solomon actually ties in with the New Testament more than any other Old Testament book of the Bible.
It's so interesting.
If you understand it.
So I know you said you kind of originally went to the Song of Solomon to help you with your own marriage and your own intimacy. And so how has learning not just the book, but the historical context behind the book and what all of this means, how did that change your own marriage?
Well, it changed it a lot, because I felt like, everything I had ever heard in church about sex was negative. Mm-hmm. We talk about, I hear people say all the time, we talk about sex, in our church. Really, what do they say? And when I ask, this is exactly what I heard. Oh, what you can't do. Pornography's bad, sex outside of marriage is bad. This is bad. Homosexuality, whatever it is, it was all the bad stuff. But what about the good stuff? And so when I actually found the custom of consummation in the Song of Solomon, and it's literally in the Song of Solomon from the first kiss all the way to orgasm.
Wow.
It's all in there. And so when I could see how that was played out in the scriptures and how it was celebrated at the betrothal banquet, it gave me such a different liberty. Like, oh my gosh, it was done in a way that was really open, it was honored, and it was celebrated. And so when you understand everything that takes place in consummation, then it totally changes, and you see it in black and white in the Bible. It's liberating, and it's totally liberating.
It really is. It's what about explain something that I feel like a lot of people may not be aware of, and maybe they are, but when a bride and a groom, when they finally did come together, the whole family was basically waiting outside of the room while they consummated the marriage. Yes. And then once the deed was done, then there was like a huge celebration. Is that right?
Yes. What happens is today when we have a wedding, we have the wedding, and then we have the reception, and the couple leaves and consummates the marriage by themselves afterwards. That's not what happened back then. Back then they had the wedding, they came back for the banquet, but the banquet couldn't start until the marriage had been consummated. And so the wedding party and the parents would stand outside the door of the wedding chamber and sit around and wait. And there was no cocktail hour. Nobody could sit around, could have a drink or eat or anything. They sat around waiting for the marriage to be consummated. And so when that happened, then the groom would take the virginity cloth and he'd go to the door and he'd hold it up in front of everybody with the blood and the semen on it and say, I've entered my garden, blah, 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 which is all in the Song of Solomon. And at that point, then the master of ceremonies would turn to all the people who were there at the banquet and say, okay, now we can eat, drink, and party, everybody, go.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I mean,
I think what's so interesting about my mind is totally blown. Okay. Because I think what is so blown about my mind is so blown about this is because it was such an open part of the community. It was such an open part of the culture and I think, Kim, kind of to your point, what you were saying about being told no, no, no. And then you get married and then it's like, yes, yes, yes. And you're like, wait a minute, I've been told all this time that this is wrong, but now I'm supposed to love it. And there's this I think culturally, we still here, even with all of the freedoms and openness that we have, I think particularly in the church, there's still some shame that hangs over probably men too, but mostly women once you're married to, be more find your sex life more enjoyable and all of that. And it's just so interesting to hear how back then it was like, the entire wedding party is celebrating the fact that this is happening. It was just such a cultural part of the way that they lived. I know Paige had told me that from reading your book that, and I did not realize this, that the Song of Solomon is actually told woman to woman. Is that true?
Yes. What I discovered was, let me just say this too, over the 40 something years I was married, I was so intrigued from that little paperback. I became so intrigued by the Song of Solomon. I would read it on a regular basis. It was like, it was just this mystery that I couldn't let go of. So I had read it so many times that when I found some of these customs, it clicked. I knew the song so well. And so what happened was the woman to woman thing was, you see all along where she says she's speaking to the daughters of Jerusalem, and they reply back, oh, most beautiful of women. And so she calls them, oh, daughters of Jerusalem, back and forth, back and forth. When Solomon is speaking, if you really look at it very closely, he never just speaks. She says, my lover, said. So she's narrating this entire thing. And so that was where it really started to click with me that this was a woman to woman thing. She was sort of our first Titus 2 woman, who was the older woman who was teaching the younger women how to love their husbands intimately. And so it really, once you start seeing that, it's so obvious in the scriptures that that's what's happening here, because she takes her journey from right before her betrothal banquet, through betrothal and the period of separation, through the wedding. And then they have this, they end up with a not fairy tale wedding at all. And they have this tumultuous marriage. So even though they were absolutely crazy about each other, it was not a good marriage, which I think a lot of women will be able to relate to the story after marriage, especially women who have their husbands have had affairs.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting because, this whole idea of women talking, she's teaching the younger generation. I love that you brought up Titus too. So what should we be telling? I actually have sons, so I don't know, that's a whole different conversation, but what should mothers of daughters, what do they take away from this story? And what should they be talking with their daughters about in terms of, and I mean, not to disclude mothers of sons, but like, what are we supposed to take away from this and for our own relationships, but also for the children that we're raising?
Well, one of the things is from the beginning of the first half of the Song of Solomon anyway, is about really more about purity and training up a young girl for marriage. It's in getting ready for marriage. And I write it a retelling of the story as what I think happened. Kind of like The Chosen, I guess, if you've been watching that.
Yeah.
So I give everybody names and I give a sort of a backdrop, but I believe that the song was meant to be used to teach our kids and to teach each other. And the words that they use were very veiled. The Hebrew euphemisms are very delicate and veiled. But once, if you read the footnotes, you realize there's some words in there that are like, whoa. When I was literally I studied every single word of the Song of Solomon in Hebrew, every word.
Wow.
And I was completely blown away at some of the euphemisms I found. And some of them are really graphic.
Can you give us an example?
Can
you give us an example?
I mean, we've already said the O word. So, I mean, why not just go there, right? I mean, we need to definitely put a disclaimer on this show before we launch it. Maybe don't have your kids in the car quite yet.
Right. You might really want to do that, because in the consummation, it gets very graphic in the sense that he starts with kissing, goes down her neck to her breasts and to her torso or her garden. That is what the female lady parts are called, is the garden. And he refers to them as a locked garden, a sealed fountain, because she was a virgin.
Right.
And a jar of nard, which had to be broken in order to enjoy it, because they were sealed. So he's referring to her purity at that point. And then it gets pretty graphic when he describes, this really blew me away, because there's a list of these like plants and herbs, trees. And I'm like, I don't get this. Well, he's describing his excitement. And some of these plants are basically hardness.
Okay. Yeah. I was going to say phallic symbols.
Yes.
Okay.
They're very symbolic of erection, hardness, and they're all in a row. And then he describes her excitement as streams of melting snow coming down Mount Lebanon, virgin snow. Yeah.
Wow.
It gets really, really graphic. And if you understand the euphemisms that they're trying to say, and that's why I say the entire consummation is in there, and then it goes into the orgasm, and then she invites him into her garden, and then so it's there.
So much. This is why you have to get the book, so your mind can be blown. I shared I lead a group of college girls, and so they're mostly all freshmen. And I was sharing with them some of the things that I read, like the marriage cloth. I don't know, somehow I missed that where the groom and the bride, where they consummate the marriage on that cloth, and then they go and share it, and it's all in Deuteronomy, where they show if a bride's parents were questioned whether their child was a virgin or not, and they would have that cloth to prove whether she was or not. And so my girls were like, oh my goodness, I had no idea. And they're like, the parents stood outside the room while they had sex. And I'm like, yeah, they did. It was a big deal. And it was then celebrated. And then you could go have the party. And I feel like we've gotten so far from the customs of scripture. And yet we wonder why we have so many questions and so many issues, especially in our sex life with our spouses.
Yeah.
Well,
I was just going to add, I think what for me, the takeaway is so much of this story and why it's been preserved in scripture for us is because it just speaks to the, I don't mean to say this in a strange way, but the seriousness of sex, that it's not to be taken lightly. I mean, when you think about all that Kim's already shared in terms of the process of being betrothed, and then there's a whole year of preparation, and then the actual wedding, and then the celebrating of the two becoming one. We've just, our culture has completely just forgotten about all of that. And in terms of, we've basically replaced like this one moment of, physical whatever, we've replaced that, for all that God had done to prepare us to get to that point. And so I just think it's so interesting that either this is like one of those books of the Bible people just don't ever read, or they read and they're like, this is weird. I do not understand why is this in here? I just know I grew up in a home, that I grew up in a Christian home. And I just remember, the Song of Solomon was always like, oh, that's like the taboo book of the Bible. And so I think it's just all of that stuff about sort of demystifying what intimacy is and why God created sex, and that it is to be enjoyed. It is to be celebrated. It is to be cherished and treasured. And it's not just this, sort of cheap exchange between two people. So I would love kind of to hear you, Kim, talk a little bit about how would you use either your book or the song or both to encourage maybe a newly married bride, or even somebody like Paige and I, we're in marriage in the middle, right? How do you encourage a bride, a wife who's struggling with intimacy with her spouse?
Well, and I think it's just because of what I went through is it. And here's the thing. When I was speaking, and I took a long hiatus from speaking because, of some things that happened in my family, that I had to stop and get the book finished too. But when I was speaking, it was scary because I would share my story. And then afterwards, people would line up and want to tell me their story. And what was so sad about that was they want to tell me their story because, oh my gosh, I had a girl who was in her late 20s who had been married, I think it was 6 years, and they'd had sex once.
Wow.
She didn't like sex. She just had, she had issues with it. And she'd been married all this time. And I had another lady come up to me, older lady. She said it took them 6 months to consummate their marriage because she was terrified. And I had another woman come up to me and say, she was older than I am. And she said, you know what? I still struggle with it. To me, it's still dirty. Mm. And I've been married decades. And so this was rampant. I had women who would cry because they would be like, I know I was supposed to be here for a reason. You have no idea how much this has helped me. So I think this problem of shame and guilt and dirty is so rampant, and especially in Christian marriages. And it's not dealt with because, first of all, nobody knew what the song meant. And so now when you can see the way, I mean, they consummated the marriage. There was no shame that, I remember coming back from my honeymoon and we went to my parents' house and, we went to open our gifts because they took all the gifts after the reception. So we went to my parents' house to open presents, and my husband's parents were going to be there too to watch us. And I told my husband, I said, I don't want to get out of the car. And he's like, why? I said, because they know what we've been doing. And so I was so ashamed and so embarrassed. I walked in there like, oh my gosh, and they didn't do that. They had sex, came out and partied with everybody. It was like, yes, and we've gotten to where, and I've, even with my first book, that's one of the reasons it bombed, is because I thought everybody would embrace it, because it's like, oh, here's some creativity, some fun things to do for, married couples for your birthday and your anniversary and Valentine's Day. And they looked at me like I had a third eye. Churches don't want to talk to me. I couldn't even get through the front door. So it's that mindset where they just won't talk about it. And so why shouldn't we? I say that logic of if it's something's good and right, we talk about it. And if it's shameful, we don't talk about it. So, that's the silence we've been giving people all these years. We can say all that, we can say, oh, it's good. Married sex is great, but we won't talk about it. Shh, it's inappropriate. And so I think there's so much, I deal with that a lot in the book, and how I think we got that way.
Yeah. So I have a question for you about kind of taking this message into, it's 2021 and sex is very much a part of our culture, and it's very open, and, it's almost we live in a world today where if you do wait to have sex until you're married, you're in the minority.
You're a weirdo.
Sure. Well, yeah, by some people may think you're a weirdo. And so I'm sure we're going to have people listening to the show today who will say, well, that's not my story. I didn't wait to have sex until I got married. I maybe had sex with the person, not only the person I married, but I maybe had sex with people before I ever got married to this person. Mm-hmm. And so they're bringing in a sexual past, and probably their spouse, in many cases, their spouses too. So how do you reconcile this story of the Song of Solomon for somebody who's like, this is my past. Like this doesn't apply to me because I did it differently. And so therefore I don't really know how to even reconcile what you're saying to me today.
Well, that's a hard question for me because I don't live in that place. Yeah. But I do believe, and this is what I have said about the Song of Solomon in my book. I believe that my book is like the tip of the iceberg. I believe that once people are able to see it, they will be able to see things that I can't see from my perspective. Yeah. And so, because there is a reconciliation in the Song of Solomon, and of course, I believe there is mercy and grace in this book. So I do think that also it helps people understand that even if you messed up in your past and you have all this baggage and luggage that you bring into your relationship, that union, can be reconciled as holy and separate, because the marriage bed is holy and separate. And I go into the marriage bed, that's a whole nother thing, about how holy that is and how the Hebrews actually understood the marriage bed to be, that it goes like right over our heads. And so I think there's a lot of other things, again, that people will gain from the book that I haven't gained. From my perspective.
I think what I hear you saying, if I could summarize it this way, is even though your experiences are different, there's a shared feeling of shame, right? Feelings are often the same. Experiences are what are differentiating us. Right. And so I think if this book helped you in your sort of shame from your vantage point of how you felt shame in terms of intimacy, I could hopefully make the correlation that someone who feels shame from a different vantage point in their intimacy, it would also help them as well. Would you agree with that?
Yes. I do. And one of the things I say is that all scripture is God breathed and useful for teaching. So therefore, you can read a passage, in this season in life, and it means this to you. And then 10 years down the road, you're going through something else and you read the exact same passage and it it just like blows off the page at you. Like, wow, how could I not see that? And so I really believe that this is like the tip of the iceberg, that it will, people will see things from a totally different perspective, depending on where they're coming from in life. And so, because that's how God's word works, it's like an onion. So I just think other people will, and men, I think, will see it even from another perspective as well.
Sure.
I just think there were so many things in the book that we can't cover it all in this short little episode. That's where I'm like, you could go and get it and read it for yourself and digest it. And you may even want to start a book club with some of your girlfriends after you read it, because there's just so I think your title is perfect with Unlock, because the secret to lasting intimacy. Because the thing is like, you think that when you go to get married, that you'll never struggle in that area, that we'll never struggle with intimacy. We're just going to have sex all the time. It's going to be great. It's going to be wonderful. We won't have issues. And then before you know it, you've been married a year, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then some kids have come along and that throws things off. And then a crisis comes along and that can throw things off. Like, there's always something coming at us. And yet, God and his word, it is timeless, and we can always go back to his word to learn something new, that we can apply to what we're going through right now. And I know for me, like being married for a long time now, I'm like, I don't think you can. The guy that married us, he said, you'll never turn your tassel in marriage. Like, you'll never graduate where you can flip your tassel and then you're finished. And I feel like the same goes with our intimate life with our spouses, that you never just arrive and you can coast and not think about it anymore. Like, no, it has to be an ongoing pursuing of one another. And I feel like that's what you I don't know, for me, after reading it, I'm like, okay, there are some things that I need to work on. There are some ways that I need to pursue my spouse more. There are some more liberties that I need to take and feel permission to do those and not feel shameful, because I was brought up in the good Christian girl home. Like, we don't talk about sex. We're not going to talk about intimacy. We're not going to talk about all the things that, and then you're led to things of the world to give you a perspective.
Exactly.
Versus going to, okay, well, what does God's word say about this? So I don't know. It's unlocked a lot for me. I still feel like I'm still figuring out how to unlock it all, but this is definitely giving me a resource and some tools. So thank you. Thank you.
If it makes you feel any better, I haven't been, I even say in the book, I struggle with some of the things I discovered. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I haven't overcome some of the things that I found. It's like, well, this is what I think it says. That doesn't mean I'm necessarily comfortable with everything I found either. Yeah. So I just putting that out there.
Well, I think the bottom line here is this: God created sex for us to enjoy it with our spouse. I mean, that's period. That's it. And unlike Paige, I did grow up in a home where my parents were like, this is actually a good thing. Like, don't be ashamed of this. So I was very fortunate that I was raised in a home that taught purity, but also taught me not to be ashamed once I was married and all of that. And so I appreciate that, like everything you're sharing today, because I think you do kind of fall on one side of the coin or the other in terms of when you look at this. And so, but to Paige's point, we never get to graduate in terms of, accomplishing marriage and, getting the perfect 4.0 in marriage. Right. So there's always opportunity for us to learn and grow in every area of our marriage, including intimacy. So I just love your heart, Kim. And thank you so much for sharing about the book and your story with us today. I just think it's so interesting and makes me want to go read Song of Solomon for sure.
Well, don't be surprised if you read it and go, oh, I don't get it. Cause like I said, it's there's so many euphemisms, there's so many metaphors and that are hidden. And frankly, some of it has been translated to sanitize the meaning. So I believe that it literally was sanitized. So there's a big reason why we don't understand it when we see it in, the way it's written.
Interesting. Okay, Kim. Well, if people want more information about you, the book, where you speak, opportunities that are coming up for you, where can they find that?
Well, you can find me at kimmore.net, or if it's easier to remember, sexandthebible.com.
Oh yeah, that's a good one right there.
and yeah, that was a really, I'm also on Facebook, Kim Moore, author, speaker. I am starting a new Kim Moore Instagram page, so you can hook up with me there. I am just now starting to do some bookings. I'm going to be speaking in DC in June, and I'm going to be on the Homekeeper show in about 2 or 3 weeks. So I am starting to
get out,
come back out of hiding, so to speak.
Yes, that's awesome.
Wow.
Well, again, I'm so glad you joined us today, Kim. Thank you so much. We will link all of the things that Kim referenced, her book, her website, all of that in our show notes so that you guys can find her easily. Yeah. Thank you so much, Kim, for joining us today.
Thank you.
We're so glad we jumped in the deep end of the pool. That's our acronym for Page of Our Lives. And we were in the deep end today. So thank you for helping us not drown, but to thrive in the deep end. So appreciate that so much, Kim.
Oh, thank you so much. I love spreading, this information, and thank you so much for asking. I'm just thrilled to talk.
You bet. All right, everybody. We will see you next time on our next episode. Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, that closes another chapter on the Page of Our Lives podcast. Did you know we're on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube? Well, we are. Just search for Page of Our Lives podcast. Curious where to find things we mention on the show? Check out our show notes on our website, pageofourlivespodcast.com. And if you liked today's episode, be sure and share it with a friend. And we would love for you to leave a rating or a review in your podcast player. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.